And we'll look at some other, I think there's other types of antennas, yeah. A little bit about loading coils and capacitive hats, which still amaze me. I don't totally understand how they work. On the Yagi, you can play with the spacing and length of the elements to create all kinds of effects with it, change the pattern drastically. You can go from a beam antenna to somebody's big truck, I guess, to a cardioid type pattern, so you can use it as a direction finding antenna. And it all has to do with the spacing of the elements and the relative lengths of the directors and reflector. But the driven element, which is what you actually connect to, will always be approximately half wavelength long. Sometimes it's slightly shorter. I think that's just to take into account for the velocity factor, so that it'll be electrically a half wavelength, but physically it might be different. And usually for using it as a beam antenna, the reflector, typically there's one, it could be two. They're normally 3 to 5% longer than the driven element. And the directors, which are in front, will be shorter, and they vary the spacing to get the different phase relationships. I guess somebody could figure out how to do one by hand, but there's so many calculators out there, you just put in the parameters you want, and it'll tell you how long to make each element and where to put it, and show you a plot of it. Oh, and it's giving you the formula for wavelength in feet. This is a typical Yagi. So you see the driven element with the reflector behind it. It's longer. And then all these we call directors are all increasingly spaced and get shorter and shorter. In this case, everything is tied electrically to the same boom. And you can do that to make it very easy to build, but it does affect on how you can feed it. There's some feed methods where the driven element will have to be isolated from the boom, but all the other elements can be connected together, and they can be tied to ground because they're just reflecting the signal. Approximately how long is a Yagi's driven element? I think it's a trick one. Is it 234 divided by the frequency in megahertz? No? It's half wavelength.
So an 80-meter Yagi would have a 120-foot long driven element.
But just imagine the way
No,
Yeah. Yeah,
120,
approximately.
Yeah.
what about the size of the boom?
Right, it would be like,
And the boom will be that long too,
I see
usually,
in Brazil, so
which is why you need a tower,
yeah.
a big tower.
Actually, the boom of that antenna was a tower.
If you're doing, I'm not sure why this is in there, but a 2-element Yagi, you would have just a reflector and the driven element to give you the highest gain. I think they're trying to say if you did it with a driven element and a director, you'd get a totally different pattern and less gain. Probably more like the cardioid type. I'm not sure what it would look like. But like I said before, changing the spacing and the length of the other elements changes the phase of each of those, and that affects the whole pattern. Why do most two-element Yagis with normal spacing have a reflector instead of a director? Well, anybody ever seen a two-element Yagi?
Those are usually for,
Usually three or more. What's the purpose of making a Yagi's parasitic elements, that's the director and reflectors, either longer or shorter than resonance? Control the phase shift.
Mechanical balance, that's funny.
Huh?
Mechanical balance, that's just funny. Right. That can be right.
It would have some effect. I don't think that's why you do it. Okay, horizontal and vertical polarization. If you are doing weak signal work in the VHF and UHF bands with the Yagi, you normally do it with it horizontally polarized. If you're doing like FM, you want to have it vertically polarized. If you're doing satellite operation, because you can have circular polarization because it's rotating, you have a crossed Yagi where you have two of them 90 degrees and you feed them out of phase. So,
Range from that's from day. You had
oh, I didn't see it, but probably.
it was you had
Yeah.
like this and then stacked along the middle.
A lot of people will build them to do satellite, and you don't need but 5 or 6 elements in it. UHF, it's not very big. You can hold it in your hand and track the satellite and tune your radio.
famous one is out.
Yeah, his was all automated.
Yeah,
And frequencies will compensate for, Doppler shift and everything.
right.
So,
Yeah, we have some guys in the NASA club that do it by hand.
yeah, I've seen that. Wow.
You saw the link that I sent you yesterday?
Huh?
I sent you yesterday, they had a school cinema. They were communicating with the space station. And it was very cool.
Oh, yeah.
You saw it?
Yeah.
That was very cool.
So we're going here in October. So there's a school over in Sunlight Beach that is set up for a contact with them there. The final week of October that runs into November there. So we got Edward. We're working on that, and it's Charlie set up and the club's part of the thing. But
Yeah, Charlie's big on that.
he is, he was instrumental in with his antenna. He's the Eris mentor. So people are encouraged to come help set up and be there for the contact and stuff. So we just don't have time in it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that trying to get kids interested in amateur radio, which maybe it's helping, but I haven't seen many. I mean, we had that, was he 10 or 11?
Yeah.
With his general. But that's an exception. Used to be, from what I understand from the old guys that got their license at 10 and 12, it was fairly common. But not now. How can two linearly polarized Yagi antennas be used to produce circular polarization? It's one with long answers. Vanessa?
Well, I heard Jim. So I say he's right.
It's the longest answer.
It's a long way to run, right?
It's on me, Robert.
Parabolic antennas, like your DirecTV dish or Dish TV. Normally, you're talking about microwave frequencies when you're using those. And the larger the dish, the more effective gain you get for any given frequency. And it goes up by 6 dB as you change the frequency. The gain will go up by 6 dB for the same size dish. So you can get if you take a standard, like a DirecTV dish, which is probably 24 inches or so, and change the feed, so you operated that up at 10 gigahertz, you get some very high gain out of it. A lot of people do that. There's at least one guy in the PCARS club that does a lot of the 10 gigahertz stuff. All you have to do is ask him, and he'll give you an hour about it. And why it's gigahertz and not gigahertz.
Well, it's gigahertz because that's what Doc Brown was looking at. I was talking about 1.21 gigawatt. He's right, obviously.
How much does the gain of an ideal parabolic dish antenna change when the operating frequency is doubled? Okay. Mobile antennas. Normally, it's going to be too short, just because of physical length. And I even found out on mine, if I put it on the top of the car, I keep hitting trees. So the fact that you're running antenna that is too short, you're really operating below its resonant frequency, so it looks like it's capacitive. So you have to compensate for it, and they usually put in what we call a loading coil at the base. Sometimes it's up higher on the antenna or in the middle. Optimum is the middle, but I think that's the next chart. And that counteracts the capacitive effect, and basically makes the electrical length of the antenna equal to what it needs to be for resonance, at least at a particular frequency. So those little lumps that you see on car antennas are loading coils. I forgot to mention that. Not only is it capacitive, but the radiation resistance decreases. Basically, the shorter it is. And it has a lot to do with, if you get into the antenna physics stuff, they talk about the aperture of an antenna, which is somewhat related to its physical size. So the smaller antenna is going to have a smaller aperture, and that affects the radiation resistance also. So the more compromised it is, the lower the radiation resistance. So how does radiation resistance of a base-fed whip antenna change below its resonant frequency?
You're correct. You think so?
Shall we see?
Why not?
It's either A or B, right?
Yeah, it's definitely.
Either A or B. 50-50. I always lose on the 50-50s.
Generally, I think.
What is the function of a loading coil on an electrically short antenna?
You know, it's not a.
Okay. It wouldn't lower the loss either, would it? Got more wire in it, it's gonna have more loss. Uh, okay, antenna efficiency. And what they're trying to show is, in this chart is kind of showing the effect of where you put the loading coil. And H1 and H2 are the two distances. So you can see at the bottom, the ratio is being plotted. So the ratio of H2 to H1, where they're equal, is going to be over here at where 1 is. So if we were to go up, you can see that the highest efficiency on these two curves, and I don't remember what the RG0 and 10 represent, but basically showing the highest points are essentially where it's in the middle. Because you're getting more current up in the middle of the antenna. Wherein if you have the loading coil at the bottom, where it makes it look like that's a large part of the antenna, that's where most of the current will be, because the current profile is going to be high at the bottom and go up to 0 at the top. So if effectively a lot of the antenna is low, that's where all the current is. So you're going to not have a good radiation angle and or efficiency. As you move the coil up, okay, you're going to have more current higher up in the antenna, and it becomes more efficient. So I think that's all that's really trying to say. So what should antenna loading coils, why should they have a high ratio of reactance to resistance? Yeah, and maximize the efficiency, just like before we talked about the efficiency of the antenna, which was the ratio of the radiation resistance to the ohmic resistance. You want the reactive part to be high compared to the resistance, which is how you measure Q, that ratio. What's the most efficient location for a loading coil on an electrically short whipped? Here's the center. Loading coils increase the Q and they decrease the bandwidth. So, and because of the narrower bandwidth, if you want to operate different frequencies, you got to retune the antenna. One of the ways, anybody have a screwdriver antenna?
I used to.
That's why they designed that, and you can actually electrically retune it by it moves the tap on the loading coil up and down to affect how much inductance you have for the loading coil.
And the same effect, like, you're familiar with body pole antennas?
No.
Yeah, body poles have the same, you have a coil, then you have a tap, and as you move the frequency, you just tap higher or lower.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same principle.
Yeah.
Manual.
Except this got electric motor.
Exactly.
You sit in the car and you tune it.
Yeah, what I used to do, I would take on what frequencies. So when I was shooting, I just look at where I was and which tape I wanted to hit because I didn't have an indicator. So that was a shortcut to find out where we were on tuning plus the listening.
What happens to SWR bandwidth when one or more loading coils are used to resonate an electrically short antenna?
B.
I believe it's B. That's the one I would have picked.
Thanks.
What happens as the Q of an antenna increases? B again? 2 in a row? Okay, top loading. One of the things that you may see on some of these antennas, they call it a capacitive hat. I've never totally understood how adding capacitance to the top of the antenna affects the inductance of the antenna, but it works. And you can actually even do it on a half-wave dipole. If you got it in your attic and you don't have enough room, you could do techniques like that to get it resonant at the right point. Usually you see it on top of a vertical, like a mobile antenna. What's an advantage of top loading an electrically short HF vertical antenna? Hmm? I think it sounds better than the others. It doesn't increase the strength. If anything, it's more of a problem running down the road with this thing on the top. So you got more windage problem. Okay. Well, that's it. They got rid of the RF grounding question this time. So we don't have any of those.